Hello, hello, hello. Good evening. It is 8:08 on Friday afternoon, Friday evening. I'm on a bit of a tight time scale today. I've got to be out of here no later than 9:30. So we're going to run for about 80 minutes, about an hour 20. And we got a lot to cover in that period of time, a lot to cover. I'll come to the sort of program of things to discuss and sort of list of things I want to get through in just 1 second. Before I do that, thanks to everyone for the continued support. Thanks to everyone who continues to check out my videos. I've got some recent videos that I uploaded. I did one 3 days ago now on the Tyson Fury Vladimir Klitschko purse bids. If you're into sort of behind the scenes boxing discussion, conspiracy theories in boxing, etc., please check that one out. I did a piece that I entitled Real Life Comedy about a mate of mine who thinks he's going to be the next heavyweight champion of the world. That went up 1 or 2 days ago now. So please check those out on my channel, as well as the recent videos I've posted between myself and Boxing Banter. With regards to what I'm keen to discuss tonight, as always when I do these videos, I'm keen to have a bit of interaction. Yeah, it makes it much more fun if I've got a bit of back and forth with people watching, as opposed to just me ranting at the camera for an hour or so. So I'm never too rigid. I'm never too strict. I'm hoping there'll be some conversation in the chat. I'm hoping people who are watching will get involved. And as always, I'm happy to answer any questions or to briefly discuss any topics that people want to hear me talk about. The basic rule with me, if you want to hear me talk about something, then I want to be discussing that something. But with that, having said that, I do want to cover a few topics tonight. I think it's important we do. So the things I'm going to be talking about in no particular order: Anthony Joshua versus Dillian Whyte. I'll probably save that till the end. Terry Flanagan versus Zepeda. We'll probably keep that towards the end as well. So before we get there, I want to talk about James Degale signing to Haymon. And I want to talk about Miguel Cotto versus Canelo Alvarez. You know, that's a bit of a mega fight, that is. I know it's not UK, but in terms of the global scene, outside of Mayweather Pacquiao, that fight's about as big as it comes. So, I want to put my point of view across on that fight. It's one that I've got a strong opinion of, and it's one that, hasn't really been covered on my channel before. So I guess without further ado, that is the one that I'm going to crack on with for the first 5-10 minutes of this live stream. I'm looking in the chat. I've got Rough Mus who's joined, Tivertap who's joined, and Ruben Caddick who's joined. Good evening all. Thanks for watching. Thanks for getting involved. I know you guys are all regulars, so really appreciate the consistent viewing. Right. Rough Master said, did you hear about Peter Fury trying to get Huey a fight with Vitali in Dusseldorf for a big old doubleheader? Madness. I certainly didn't hear about that, Rough Master. If you've got any link you can send or post or any source, I'd be very, very keen to read about that. I think if Vitali Klitschko was going to come out of retirement, he'd be doing it against a very, very big name or against a reigning champion. Most likely not against a guy like Huey Fury, who, although we know him, we're big fans of him, probably doesn't have the broadest commercial appeal. J-Man has joined in. Hello, sir. Anyway, let's go straight on to topic number one. As I said, I've got to be out of here for 9:30 tonight, so I'm going to try and move forward. Saul Canelo Alvarez versus Miguel Cotto. Now, if you're watching, comment in the chat. Let me know who wins this fight. People talk about this as a 50-50. And there are some 50-50s in the world of boxing that are so 50-50, I find it hard to come down on one side or the other. I'll give you two examples that come to mind immediately. Kell Brook versus Amir Khan. Genuinely can't pick a winner there. James Degale versus Cole Frost. Genuinely can't pick a winner there. Saul Canelo Alvarez versus Miguel Cotto. I can pick a winner there. And it's a confident selection. And that's Saul Canelo Alvarez. Canelo's a youngster. He's got a huge amount of experience, nearly 50 fights at such a young age. But he's got a lot of miles left on his clock as far as I'm concerned. A lot of those fights weren't very difficult fights. A lot of them were easy work for him. And he's coming out to the point now where he's probably going to be more in the prime of his career. Miguel Cotto, as I say, you know, Canelo's probably more at the beginning of his career. Miguel Cotto's a decade older and very much in the autumn of his career. You know, Miguel Cotto's had some tough fights. He's had less fights than Canelo, but a lot of miles on the clock. He's been in a lot of wars. He's been in some good fights. He's been hurt in fights. He's been stopped in fights. For me, Canelo is the fresher opponent. You know, people talk about size difference in this matchup. But for me, if there's any size difference, it's going to be in Canelo's favour. I know Canelo's seen as a light middleweight and Miguel Cotto supposedly campaigns at middleweight, but realistically, Saul Canelo Alvarez is the bigger man in there. Let's put it this way. Canelo's fought his last 3 fights at 155 pounds. Yeah. Miguel Cotto, even though he's been the middleweight champion, actually weighed in for his last fight at 153.5 pounds. So despite the fact they've been campaigning in different divisions, Miguel Cotto weighed in for his last fight as a light middleweight and Canelo weighed in as a middleweight. You know, you've got to ask yourself, what is the last relevant piece of form that Miguel Cotto has? For me, the Daniel Gill form isn't relevant. You know, the catch weight and how bad Daniel Gill looked at the weigh-in, having drained so much after being knocked out by Golovkin, makes that piece of form largely irrelevant. The Sergio Martinez fight, the form there, in my opinion, is largely irrelevant due to Martinez's injury. The Delvin Rodriguez fight is irrelevant form because the opponent is of such low caliber. The last actual bit of relevant form that Miguel Cotto brings to the table, number 1, getting schooled by Austin Trout, and number 2, getting dominated by Floyd Mayweather. Those are the last 2 times we saw Miguel Cotto fight a live opponent. Since then, he's been in against weight-drained opponents, injured opponents, useless opponents. You know, it's actually been a long, long while since, you know, Miguel Cotto has, you know, got a piece of form that is strong and not easy just to throw out the window. Now, people say Miguel Cotto has very, very good power and he looks like a devastating puncher since he's been with Freddie Rose. And yes, he has improved. But again, you do have to ask yourself, he's improved against what? How easy is it to look against Sergio Martinez, who can't move? Or Daniel Gill, who's so weight drained, he can't put on a proper performance? You know, what I would say is Saul Canelo Alvarez has an excellent chin. He's proper, you know, he's a tough, tough guy. I don't believe he's ever even been dropped in a fight. Saul Canelo Alvarez also has proper power, you know, real power. And for me, if there's anyone getting knocked out in this fight, it's Canelo. Sorry, it's Cotto. I think Canelo's got more power of the two. You know, I heard some comments Floyd made that he was still feeling a body punch. Canelo landed on him a year later. I think Canelo's got greater durability. Canelo's got more miles on the clock. Canelo's got more power. And Canelo's beaten a more reputable opponent recently. You know, I'm not talking just in terms of name and star quality. I'm also talking about, you know, where they are in their career. I know it's controversial, but Canelo beat a live guy in Austin Trout who beat Cotto. Canelo beat Erislandy Lara in a controversial fight. Canelo beat James Kirkland. You know, for me, this is all stronger form than an injured Martinez or a weight-drained Daniel Gill. Just my personal opinion. I see Canelo winning this fight, and I see Canelo winning it with a bit in hand. You know, people say Canelo has got stamina problems, and that's all well and good. But we've seen Canelo go 12 rounds recently and win against sort of top-level guys like Austin Trout and Erislandy Lara. When was the last time you saw Miguel Cotto go 12 rounds in a winning effort? Seriously, when was the last time you saw Miguel Cotto, now in his mid-30s, go 12 rounds in a winning effort? For me, if there's anyone who's going to have stamina problems in this fight, it could be the older Cotto, who hasn't gone 12 rounds and won for a very long time. You know, for me, Canelo's got all the advantages. The momentum's there in his career. The future is ahead of him. He's the bigger man. He's got the better power, the better chin in my eyes. And I really do think he's going to win. Canelo's imminently beatable. He can be outskilled by a slick, moving boxer. But I don't think Miguel Cotto under Freddie Rose is necessarily, you know, going to be the most ardent technician. I think it's going to be a war. I think it's going to be an entertaining fight. fundamentally, I think Canelo is going to win. Let me go to the chat. J-Man is picking Alvarez. Amigan is picking Alvarez. Liam's picking Alvarez. Amigan says Cotto is too small. Canelo is very powerful, even at light middle. J-Man says Cotto has been flattered since moving to Roach. Rodriguez is garbage. Martinez was crippled, and Gil was malnutritioned. Spot on, absolutely spot on. I'll tell you what, I completely agree with all of the above, in fact, there's nobody picking Miguel Cotto. Nobody picking Miguel Cotto from the comments I've read so far. Ruben says, do you know what else is a 50-50 fight? Fury versus Vlad. Ruben, in my mind, it's a 50-50 fight. I'd say that is a genuine 50-50. I don't think in the public perception it's a 50-50 fight. I imagine with the bookies, Vladimir will start a strong favourite, and he will with the public as well. Rough Moss, people are overhyping Cotto's last 2 fights. He did look good, but who is he fighting? What condition were they in, especially Martinez? Absolutely spot on. It's so easy to look good against that level of opposition. Whereas Canelo has been taking tough fights, real tough fights. The Arislandi Laros of this world. I'll tell you, Cotto's last relevant form, as I say, was Austin Trout, and Canelo looked a hell of a lot better against Austin Trout than Cotto did. Tivatap, last time Cotto was fighting Gil, who was impersonating Skeleton from Haymon at the weigh-in. J-Man is saying, I think he's answering my question, when was the last time Cotto went 12 rounds? Margarito, no, sorry, that was a TKO for Cotto. Yeah, and this is what I don't get. People are saying, oh, Canelo's got stamina problems. Well, I saw Canelo being the come-forward fighter over 12 against Austin Trout. I saw Canelo being the come-forward fighter over 12 against Arislandi Lara. I haven't seen Miguel Cotto go to war for 12 rounds and win for a very, very long time. I saw him go 12 rounds against Floyd Mayweather and Austin Trout and get his arse handed to him. It's a different kettle of fish from my eyes. Amigan says, I remember Golding Boy stating that he doesn't like Canelo taking these dangerous fights. Where's his not Hypnotic Wonder? Isn't he usually trolling around now? Well, Hypnotic Wonder was giving me some stick about Chris Eubank Jr. the other day. I was unsure whether he was trolling or genuinely believing it. But, the thing about Canelo is he's his own man. He takes these tough fights, He's not worried about the risk-reward factor. If I was advising him, I certainly wouldn't have had him fight Austin Trout when he did. So, fair play to Canelo. Rough Mus says, yo, Gossip, do you know what's happening with Brook versus Rios? Brook needs a big name like Rios for his next fight. He's supposed to be world champion, and he's fought 2 borderline bums as his last 2. Funnily enough, I saw an interview just before I came live online, actually, Rough Mus. It's on Michelle Phelps' YouTube channel. It's an interview with Eddie Hearn, I believe. And Eddie Hearn says that fight is proving very difficult to make. They've made Rios a very generous offer. He's delaying. He hasn't accepted it yet. Robert Garcia's causing problems, and they're unsure what direction that fight's going to go in. I do have concern about who they'll bring in as a replacement for Rios if Rios doesn't fight. I've heard Juan Manuel Marquez, but maybe they're running out of notice for an opponent of that nature. So if that fight's slipping away, it could be a 3rd borderline bum. And I've got to be honest with you, this Brandon Rios fight doesn't particularly excite me either. I think Kelbrook absolutely schools Brandon Rios. I think Kelbrook does a very similar job to what he did to Sean Porter, but I think Brandon Rios is a much lesser fighter than Porter, so I think it'll be easier work for Kel. And I think against someone as unskilled and sloppy as Rios, Kel is going to look really sharp in that. Amigan says there's an issue with the gloves and the rematch clause, according to Garcia. Yeah, British Boxing Board of Control won't allow Rios' gloves, and Kel wants a rematch, which is obligatory for these kind of voluntary defences. So for me, maybe Rios just doesn't want to fight. Maybe he knows Kel's tough work and he's got more financially viable, glamorous options for himself available in the States. Who knows, maybe he'll turn up against Floyd Mayweather or something like that. Anyway, we've talked Canelo Cotto. I've made my opinions clear on that. As always, keen to keep the dialogue going in the chat. I'm not going to keep it overly static. So any comments, questions, suggestions you have, do throw them out there. But on my loose program, what we're next going to talk about is James Degale signing with Al Haymon. Now, I've got clarification on this. I saw this interview with Eddie Hearn. This is on Michelle Phelps' YouTube channel. Eddie Hearn will still be working with James Degale. Yeah, a lot of people thought this meant there's no more Eddie Hearn and James Degale. Incorrect. Eddie Hearn is still the promoter for James Degale. James Degale will just be being advised by Al Haymon. You got to wonder about James Degale's fight purses, you know. Al Haymon's taking a cut. Ambrose Mendy's taking a cut. Jim McDonald's taking a cut. Eddie Hearn is taking a cut. The taxman will be taking a big cut. How much is actually going to be left in the coffers for James Degale with all these advisors on his team and with all these managers? Really interesting. Haymon's now got two British fighters on his books, Carl Frampton and James Degale. Two relatively recent world champions. Two guys who are probably not the number one in the division, but appear to have, you know, really, really high upside and appear to be going in the right direction. It's interesting for James Degale, you know. It's possibly a strange move for him on the face of it, given the fact that Al Haymon doesn't have Andre Ward. Al Haymon doesn't have Carl Frost. Al Haymon doesn't have George Groves. You'd think that the actual big fights in the division would be easier to make with Eddie Hearn than Al Haymon. So I'm not 100% sure why he's taken that option. I'm sure Al Haymon does manage some big super middleweights, but you know, maybe it's just that Al Haymon's made him an offer that he can't refuse financially. It's interesting to see, but I can't imagine Eddie Hearn's very happy. I mean, Degale was so complimentary about Eddie Hearn when he won the world title, and he said that Eddie had done everything right. So now, obviously, Eddie will still be able to promote him, but I guess Al Haymon and that side of the thing will decide on opponents and decide which direction they look to go in with James Degale. So it's got to be a bit of a blow for Eddie Hearn. I guess he's losing some of the strategy and losing some of the tactical positioning behind the scenes as to where he takes James Degale. I guess Al Haymon's going to be pretty aggressive in getting Degale as big a purses as possible. So it'll be interesting to see in what direction they go. Maybe Degale's looking to unify against the Badu Jack George Groves winner. Who knows? But you guess if George Groves wins that fight, possibly you could have done that without Al Haymon's involvement. So it's very interesting. You know, I've heard James Degale being so complimentary about Eddie Hearn after the last fight that I can't imagine he's been looking for a way out. I imagine Al Haymon's approached him and they've done business there. I wonder if this means that Ambrose Mendy is no longer in the camp for James Degale. I mean, is there room for two high-profile advisors? Yeah, very interesting. If you're watching this, do let me know why James Degale's done this. Do let me know what fights you think we'll see out of this, and how big a blow is this to Eddie Hearn. He's still got Degale under contract. He still promotes James Degale. Is it a loss to the Eddie Hearn ego? I think possibly. Is it an annoyance that he may have less control over the James Degale opponents? Possibly. Let me know your thoughts. I mean, sort of advisor-promoter relationship, something that I don't have detailed knowledge on. So how do you think this is going to affect Eddie Hearn, James Degale, day-to-day and in their careers? Let me have a look at the chat. Roughmas, I agree that Brooks schools Rios. I think it'd be an interesting fight. Rios' granite chin and Brooks' laser-guided right hand would be good to see it in together. Rios has a good chin. I don't think he's ever been stopped, actually. But I mean, I just see it as like Kelbrook Porter, just like a wider decision. Ross Fleming says, do a follow-up vid on the fitness instructor turned boxer. Funniest thing I've ever seen in a while. Bring your camera next time you spar him. Ha ha. Yeah, I'll have to do a follow-up on that. If anyone hasn't seen that, please do check it out. It's the most recent or second most recent video I've posted on the channel, and I've had some good feedback on that. I will do a follow-up. I'm going to speak to him next week, and yeah, we'll see what the plan is. But you know, it's a bit of a messy situation. It could be time for Brook Furman, but I don't think Hearn will put him in there for a couple of fights. No, I don't think Hearn will put him in there either. Hearn's waiting, hoping he gets a big payoff against a Marquez or a Pacquiao or a Mayweather or a Khan. You know, Furman is still lower risk reward compared to those guys. Amigon, when I saw that announced, I honestly thought he had jumped ship. I saw the same interview just before the stream began. Yeah. So to me, Eddie Hearn didn't look best pleased about that, Amigon. You know, interesting though. J-Man says, does Haymon have Badu Jack? Maybe he thinks he'll beat Groves. Tivertap says he has Durrell, doesn't he? And Amigan says he has both, I think. Yeah, I think he's got both. But I mean, the really big players for James, where are the super fights for James Degale? The super fights are not Durrell or Badu Jack. It's George Groves, it's Andre Ward, it's Carl Frost. Those are the huge fights. And for me, all of those fights could be easily made with Eddie Hearn. Eddie Hearn's got a relationship with Andre Ward. Yeah, certainly with Carl Frost, certainly with George Groves. Eddie Hearn's got the next generation of easy fights for James Degale as well. And perhaps Hearn could flog a pay-per-view in a year's time. Degale versus Callum Smith. Degale versus Rocky Fielding. Degale versus Martin Murray. You know, for me, James Degale was not the kind of fighter who necessarily needed to make that jump. I question how much value that Haymon can add to a guy like James Degale. There's certainly value he can add to a lot of fighters, but I'm not sure whether James Degale was one of them. That's just my point of view. I imagine for Jail to jump ship, not that he's jumped ship, you know, he's still with Matchroom, but for him to change things up, there must have been a huge financial incentive. Right, so we've talked Cotto, Canelo. We've talked James Degale signing with Al Haymon. Before we get onto the main topic of the night, which is Anthony Joshua versus Dillian Whyte, I just want to throw it out there briefly. Terry Flanagan, world title fight this week. How do we think that's going to go? The guy's name, I think it's Zepeda. Haven't seen too much of him. What I have seen, my basic thought is this. Flanagan wins on points, or Zepeda wins by knockout. Yeah, Flanagan, I see him as a kind of defensive technician, you know, not overly powerful, whereas the other guy wins by knockouts, by early knockouts, very regularly. I see Flanagan as a likely favourite to win on points. Zepeda by knockout wouldn't amaze me in all honesty. And I'm going to be honest, I do find it hard to get up for this fight, you know. It's not dissimilar to Bulioni Chudinov, not dissimilar to that, which I also find hard to get up to. I find that easier to get up for just because I've been following Bulioni for a long time, a lot longer than I have Flanagan. So I have a more of a personal interest in that fight. But the difficulty with both fights is you're dealing with two guys here who are so far away from the top of their division. I mean, Frank Bulioni and Terry Flanagan, it's near impossible to class them as top 10 in their respective divisions. So it's kind of hard to buy into this sort of 50-50 world title match when you've got two guys who are nowhere near the top of their sport. I mean, Frank Bulioni isn't even top 5 in the country. He probably isn't even 6th or 7th. He's probably like 8th or 9th best super middleweight in the country, you know. And he's fighting for a world title. And it's so hard to get up for that, especially when the opponent he's fighting doesn't appear to be too great either. You know, it's great to see these guys getting world title opportunities, but you know, it's probably a European. I know the guy's not European, but it's probably a European level fight with a world badge on it. So I found that hard to get up for. As I said, Terry Flanagan seems like a good guy, but he's possibly not the most entertaining fighter. He doesn't seem to have the highest upside. And whilst I can think he's going to win, could win, I think the comparisons to Ricky Hatton in there. I don't think he's going to be some huge sort of fan favourite and garner massive support and, you know, lead a nation over to the States to unify titles and that sort of thing. Let me know your thoughts on that fight. There's a card, obviously. You got Paul Butler making his return. You've got Liam Walsh on the card. So there's a few decent fighters on the Box Nation card. It's great that Frank Warren's put up his money and got this world title fight in the UK. And You know, really backs his man. Fair play again to Frank Warren for doing that. But if I'm honest, even as a hardcore boxing fan, I'm not going to bed tonight with butterflies in my stomach. I'm not waking up tomorrow morning really excited to see that fight. It just is lacking a bit of an X factor for me, and I'm sorry. I've just got to speak honestly on the subject. Next week we got Eddie Hearn's card again. I'm not overly excited for it, but we've got Crolla Perez. We've got Kiko Martinez Quigg, which is probably a more interesting fight of all of them together. So some good stuff going on. Let me know who you're picking over both of those cards. Let me know how you see those ones going. Now, let's talk Anthony Joshua versus Dillian Whyte, the main sort of topic that I wanted to cover in this video. So, bit of background, everyone knows these two guys don't get on very well. Everyone knows Dillian Whyte dropped and beat Anthony Joshua in the amateurs. And, you know, they're probably not on each other's Christmas card list, I think it's fair to say. Both unbeaten at heavyweight. I've followed these guys for quite a while. I've followed Dillian Whyte for a long, long time, well before his drugs ban. I don't know if anyone here read it, but I used to read Boxing News Weekly magazine. And I remember they did a feature on Dillian Whyte ages ago now, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, highlighting him as one to watch. I've followed him since then. And, you know, the guy is a talent. The guy is a really, really good fighter. It's an interesting fight. Now, my understanding is these two guys have agreed to fight. It's going to be for the British title. And my understanding is that they will fight probably November to December time. It wouldn't surprise me if that's a headline fight at the O2. It wouldn't surprise me, unfortunately, if it's pay-per-view. You know, putting my cards on the table very early doors. Dillian Whyte, Anthony Joshua, British title fight. Wouldn't surprise me if it's pay-per-view. Wouldn't surprise me if you've got a Kell Brook or a James Degale on the undercard as well in a world title fight. Maybe Scott Quigg. But I think that could be the headline fight of a pay-per-view. Now, interesting. Eddie Hearn did a video the other day with IFL TV, probably 2 or 3 days ago now, where he said he was considering 3 opponents for Joshua's more recent fight. You know, it's the next fight that he's going to be in. I think the 3 opponents are Tony Thompson, Marius Watt, and Gary Cornish. Now, it had been announced previously that it was Marius Watt, which I thought was an excellent matchup. Then it seemed to suggest it could well be Gary Cornish. Now, Eddie Hearn seemed to think that the Gary Cornish fight was a very, very solid option, but was less keen when it was discussed that it may not be for a British title. So if Dillian Whyte versus Anthony Joshua is for the British title in December, I don't really see Joshua versus Cornish being for the British title when they fight. So maybe this means that Joshua Cornish doesn't happen. To be honest, that's not a fight that I want to see. Cornish hasn't beaten anyone of any relevance. You know, his resume is far worse than Dillian Whyte's. And from what I've seen, from what I hear, I think Cornish is not going to be able to take the power of Joshua. He's chinny, he can be hurt in fights, and I think Joshua could well KO him in the first round. So I really want to see the Marius Watt fight. I think that would be a far better learning experience for Joshua. I think that will add far more benefit to his career, and I think that is much more likely to, you know, to really, really help him out. Now, you know, regardless of that, I think that both guys are going to fight on Eddie Hearn shows. I think Dillian Whyte is going to fight on the whole show against a yet-to-be-named opponent, and Anthony Joshua will fight against one of those 3, probably Cornish, but I'm hoping Watt. I think the Tony Thompson matchup is an illusion. I don't think they'll stick Thompson in with Joshua. I see that as a 50-50 fight, and I think they'll want to stick Joshua in with someone he can easily beat. Thompson's a lot harder than Gary Cornish and a lot harder than Marius Watt. He's got, you know, much greater skills than either of those guys, in my opinion. So I think it's between Walker and Cornish. I still think it'll be Cornish, but I'm hoping Eddie Hearn was being truthful when he said that fight lost appeal if it wasn't for the world title. So in my eyes, Dillian Whyte versus Joshua will happen December after both of them have fought on any on cards in between. Now I'm going to get to how I think that Whyte Joshua fight is going to go in just a minute. Before I do, let me catch up with the chat. Even. J-Man is talking about Degale leaving for Haymon. He says, not sure it's slow turn at all. Not sure he wants to match Degale against his stable. Sees it as a way to get fights against American opposition for decent money. In terms of control, I'd have thought Eddie Hearn would have protected himself. Al could have made him an offer he can't refuse, Godfather style. There. Amigan says, money-wise, Abraham is a bigger draw in Germany. I can't see that. I can see that being quite a decent payday for Degale. Yeah, and I mean, this is what I mean. He could have got that for Eddie Hearn, or through Eddie Hearn. He could have got that, or he could have got the Andre Ward fight in America through Eddie Hearn. So I don't see where Al Haymon brings the value. Sean says, more likely to land Groves than Frotz, and Frotz over Ward for Degale right now. Ross says, is it me, or is Kerry starting to slur his words, or is that just always how he talks? Ruff Mus says he's just got a Jeremy Kyle dialect. Tivertap says Triple G versus James Degale. Degale seems annoyed with the aura that surrounds his knockouts. Said he's not superhuman. Possibly one when Triple G goes up to 168. Yeah, I don't think Triple G's ever going to go up to 168, as in make a career move up there. I think he might have a big fight at 168. Yeah, a big pay-per-view fight against a Frotz or a Ward. But I don't think he'd necessarily go up there unless it was a huge event. And I don't see Triple G versus James Degale being that, to be honest. Degale just still doesn't have the profile. I mean, Triple G, he's a small middleweight. You know, he'll go up to 168 for a crazy payday. But realistically, you know, he was asking for a 164 catch rate with Ward, which seems ludicrous. Amigan says the Butler fight is off, isn't it? Hearn mentioned that Butler doesn't fancy the fight with your fight after Hearn won the purse bit. That's correct, yeah. So that fight is off. Having said that, Butler is fighting tomorrow against a sort of comeback opponent, I think. J-Man says, don't know about Zepeda. Seems like he really makes lightweight in recent fights. This could be a factor and backs up your Flanagan and points prediction. Just what's the weigh-in, actually? They both made the weight. Zepeda weighed in at 134.5. Flanagan weighed in at 135. Flanagan did look in superb shape, I must say. And Flanagan looked the bigger of the two to my eyes. Amigan, he says wrong fight on Butler. Jamin, I'd be shocked if Whyte versus Joshua isn't a pay-per-view. Yeah, completely agree, J-Man. I think you're spot on there. I think that will cause some shockwaves for a British title fight. Bart says, yes, Steve Bruce wrote that in Boxing Monthly. I read that. Yeah, same here. Amigan, I really hope Dillian hammers AJ. I'm not hating. I just want to see how AJ deals with someone hitting back. El Dude, Fury versus Klitschko, 100% action. Wilder Areola maybe next. I hope not. That's a terrible fight. You know, we saw what Wilder did to Stiverne, and we saw what Stiverne did to Areola. It doesn't work like that, but Chris Areola went life or death with a journeyman. El Dude also says he goes 60-40 in favour of Cotto. Interesting. Bart says Dillian wasn't stopped by Vladimir when they sparred during the Povetkin training sessions. He was dropped, and that means a lot, Tom. Ruff Mus says, cool fight. It's definitely being overhyped. Whyte beat Joshua when he was extremely inexperienced. Joshua's come on lows. Joshua by KO. El Dude says Joshua by KO. Sammy Joe says, all yous think you're solid. I'd fight anyone in this chat. Oh dear. He says, boxing gossip, why don't you spar me? I'll bang you out. Yeah, I'm sure you would, mate. I'm not too handy, to be honest. So I wouldn't be keen to spar you because you probably would hurt me. Bart Allen says, Ruff Mus, do you realise how much Whyte accomplished within kickboxing before that fight? Becoming the British champion amongst other things, and sparred a lot of good people during his ban. I've heard really good reports from Dillian Whyte, both from the Furies and from James Ali Basir on Baylor TV, who was talking about Whyte versus Klitschko in training camp. So shout out to Baylor TV for that coverage. But yeah, really, really good reports. Learning Tigran says hi there, hello. Joshua has the skills and tools. Dillian needs more survival skills. And Ruben says Whyte will overwhelm Anthony Joshua. There's a bit of back and forth between some guys, so I won't read out just because I want to keep it moving. But yeah, I watched the Anthony Joshua The Journey documentary on ITV4 last night. Documentary, I think, came out 6 months ago. And for whatever reason, I've just got around to watching it. Now, what was interesting is there was a lot of Joshua's amateur fights where he was obviously wearing big gloves, wearing a head guard, and going to war with some opponents. And these opponents were less scared to come back at Joshua, probably because of the head guards and the amateur style and that sort of thing. Now, one thing I found interesting is, I know it's the amateur days, I know it's a different game, and I know Joshua's, really improved a lot, but he, for me, looked very uncomfortable whenever opponents came forward and put pressure on him. And in the pro game, we haven't actually seen anyone come forward and put pressure on him and make him uncomfortable, like you can see in the tapes of his old amateur fights. For me, he's a guy who is very reliant on range, Anthony Joshua. He likes to work behind the jab. He likes to throw power punches. He likes to push opponents up against the ropes, and he likes to dominate and control. But I noticed when opponents came forward on him, pushed him back, he was slightly awkward. He was slightly hittable. He was less comfortable when he couldn't control their range and literally stand at jabbing range with his opponent. So, in my eyes, the kind of guy who could cause Anthony Joshua problems is someone who's not just going to stand there at the end of his jab, who's going to be moving, who isn't just going to be able to pepper with a long 1-2. And guys like Dillian Whyte, guys like Derek Chisora, at the very least, they come forward, they throw punches. Dillian Whyte's an aggressive, explosive fighter. The way I look at this, Dillian Whyte has a very, very good chance in the sense that he punches very hard. Dillian Whyte seems to have genuine punching power at a decent level. And the way, I have concerns about Anthony Joshua's chin. I have concerns about how he will deal with a serious presser fighter. And to be fair, he hasn't proven that in the pro ranks yet. So I think Dillian Whyte has got a chance in this fight. He's got to come forward. He's got to not be scared of Joshua. He's got to try and get inside the jab. He's got to stop Joshua from controlling the pace, stop Joshua from controlling the reins, and he's got to make it uncomfortable for Joshua. He can't just stand at the end of the jab. He can't just be up against the ropes. He's got to be coming forward. He's got to be, getting inside. He's got to be making life really, really tough for Anthony Joshua. And if he does that, he has a chance. What I would say is, recently Joshua stepped up the level of opposition. The fight against Kevin Johnson is much stronger form than anything Dillian Whyte's produced. And I think Joshua, at this stage, does look to be the superior boxer to Whyte. Joshua's got the length. He's got possibly a bit more sort of technical pedigree than Dillian Whyte. And I think if Dillian Whyte stands there and tries to box with Joshua, it may be in Joshua's favour. I really think Whyte's got to be very aggressive. He's got to rush Joshua. He's got to put him on his back foot, not allow him to get his rhythm, his timing, his range. I think range is so crucial, so crucial. A guy like Anthony Joshua is so good at his selected range. What you've got to do is take him off his game by getting on his chest and by pushing him around and by putting him on his back foot. And I think Dillian Whyte is the kind of fighter who'll do that. He's got a good chin, he's tough, he's strong, he's a heavy guy. I don't rule Dillian Whyte out of this fight. There's potential for him to get in Joshua's head. He's a very aggressive fighter, and he's got a style that could cause an interesting question for Joshua. I do make Joshua a reasonable favourite in this fight, though. I really do. I think he's shown a lot of improvements throughout the amateurs. And I do think, from the amateurs to this stage, and I think the way he's been performing lately against Kevin Johnson, etc., is strong form for the level of a British title fight. I really do. So I'll make Joshua a favourite, but it's an interesting fight. And we could learn a lot about Dillian Whyte as well. How good's his chin? You know, how hard does he hit? Hopefully he'll ask questions of Anthony Joshua. Obviously AJ's got a fight in between now and then. If it's Gary Cornice, I'm not overly excited. If it's Marius Walk, that's a really excellent learning fight. J-Man, Joshua to win, mainly due to White's bad luck with the hand injury. And that's a very good point you raised there. You know, Dillian Whyte was extremely active earlier in the year. He hasn't fought for a long time now. Could that be an issue? I do understand he's fighting on the Eddie Hearn card and pass, so possibly a bit of activity, you know, to be gained at that stage. But, you know, nevertheless, it's not ideal preparation to have a hand injury. He's also had drug bans and his trainer in a hit and run injury. Terrible run of bad luck. Very good point. Bart says it's a good point. El Dude, Mares versus Santa Cruz next. Winner could get Frampton. J-Man, Bart Allen. Don't know what you think, but White has really impressed me in terms of attitude. Going and getting quality sparring on his ban. Joshua's come on. I think it's good timing. Yeah, J-Man, I'm agreeing with everything you're saying tonight. And that's another one. You know, White's attitude looks really, really good. You know, fearless guy, wants to fight, makes himself available, you know, backs himself, really believes he's got a future in the sport. And, you know, as I say, the stuff he's done with Klitschko, the stuff he's done with the Furies really, really impresses me. I do think you're right. It's very good timing for Joshua, less so for White. And I think the momentum's with Joshua. I expect Anthony Joshua to win. But, you know, we're getting to the stage now where a loss to Anthony Joshua doesn't necessarily, you know, it's not necessarily the end of Dillian Whyte's career. You know, Joshua's never been in with a young opponent or a guy with like a record like Dillian Whyte's. And yeah, if he does lose to Joshua, it doesn't mean Dillian Whyte is over. There are still good domestic fights for Dillian Whyte. You know, I think Dillian Whyte's an interesting opponent for a Hughie Fury, maybe even for a David Price. He'd probably be the best opponent David Price has ever beaten if those two fought. So there's still fights out there for Dillian Whyte, and he can come back and he can rebuild. Right, I'm just having a look. Some more points coming through in the chat. Learning, Tigran, bit of a random question. I remember you saying you were knowledgeable in the heavyweight division. I remember seeing a while ago that McDermott was going to fight Lewison for the English. Big fan of McDermott, but I haven't been able to find any more. Will he fight again or has he retired? He hasn't retired. Apparently, he's just in very, very, very bad shape. I understand that he was offered a fight against Dillian Whyte, actually, recently. And he needed something like, he said he needed 3 or 4 months to get him fighting for this because he'd let himself go so much. So it's a bit of a weird one for John McDermott. You know, he won that title. He could have certainly been used as an opponent for the likes of Dillian Whyte, Anthony Joshua, but yeah, he seems to have taken a back seat. He hasn't fought since that Skelton win, where he looked okay, to be honest. Bart says, like you said last time, Tom, if White, which I believe he can win, gets on the ropes, it's over. Yeah, you know, you can't do that against Anthony Joshua. It's all about making someone feel uncomfortable, taking them away from their A game. And Joshua's A game is so obvious. You know, there are so many things that aren't obvious about Joshua. Let's not allow him to do the things that he clearly thrives off, you know, from an opponent perspective. El Dude says Brook Rios is a good fight, negotiations falling apart. I don't buy into it as a great fight. I mean, what's Rios done? Beating Mike Alvarez, he was off his head. J-Man, having said I back Joshua, I'm still looking forward to the fight. Both are effectively novices, and White's seemingly tenacity could be a factor. Yeah, agreed. Bart Allen agreed. Joshua is dangerous. He's still growing in skill and maturing as a pro. Bad news for his foes. Ruben is quoting, says, I have a feeling that Andy Joshua is no heart and is a shit house. Ruben, for those who don't know, is Tyson Fury's biggest fan. I think he's even got Tyson Fury mouse mat. So yeah, he's quoting the big man there. Well, dude says Fury will KO Klitschko in 8. Rough Moss says he's the best heavyweight by 25 miles. Ruben says Fury and Whyte are the only good heavyweights in Britain. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Tyson Fury. I agree with you guys. I think skill-wise, he does seem to be the best heavyweight in the world at present. J-Man says, I'd like to see Whyte Chisora. Look. Bart Allen, with Whyte's 20-1 K1 record and the fact he's only been defeated once, and he's defeated that opponent since, and being of the few that's not to be dropped by Vladimir, does that confirm he's got a great chin? As I believe durability and chin are tested far more in kickboxing and MMA compared to the art of boxing. But I'm going to plead ignorance there. I don't know about MMA. I don't know about kickboxing. Never been involved in either sport. Never followed either sport. And to be honest, I don't know about Dillian Whyte's record in either sport. K1, MMA, whatever. I knew he was involved in those sports. And I have been told he's got an excellent chin. But what I'm taking that from is what I've heard about him in sparring in boxing as opposed to MMA. So you may well raise a very good point there. Unfortunately, I'm just not knowing the answer at my end. There's some banter about Ruben's mouse mat, and then Ruben agrees that Whyte Chisora is an awesome fight. It's an interesting fight. For me, I'd rather see either guy against a David Price or against a Hughie Fury or an Anthony Joshua. I prefer the kind of matchups where you've got like a sort of boxer against a come forward aggressive fighter. I think like a Hughie Fury versus a Derek Chisora stylistically is a very interesting matchup. El Dude says Rios is a former world champion and he did beat your boy Murray, by the way. Who else is there for Brook besides Furman and Khan? Well, there's a lot better welterweights than Tim Bradley. I mean, Sean Porter, Tim Bradley, Mayweather, Pacquiao, obviously Furman and Khan, as you've mentioned. To be honest, I think guys like Errol Spence, Marcus Maidana, I think a lot of these guys beat Brandon Rios. The thing you've got to remember is Brandon Rios was soundly outboxed by a peak Mike Alvarado. And if he's getting soundly outboxed by a peak Mike Alvarado, he's surely going to be outboxed by Kell Brook. Learning Tigran Chagaya Pianetta, what are your thoughts? Did a video on this some time ago. Tentatively, I'm picking Pianetta. I think he's. I think Pianetta is the more skilled of the two. I think he's got better fundamentals, and I think Pianetta is a slightly underrated operator, whereas Chagayev, I think, was looking old and looking a bit worn out and a bit like in a few miles on the clock in his last fight against Freza Quendo. Quendo is like a very, very old guy who you wouldn't really see as a world level type opponent, and he took Chagayev life or death. So I'm picking Pianetta in that fight. I watched Wingy's video the other day, shout out to Wingy, and I noticed Wingy picked Pianetta as well. So I imagine Chagayev starts as a fairly strong favourite, but I think amongst the boxing hardcore, we're probably, I think in all likelihood, there's quite a few of us picking Pianetta in that fight. There's a guy called Luis Ortiz. If you don't know him, check him out. He's the WBA interim heavyweight title. I think at some stage, either he or Lucas Brown will get a chance to fight the winner of Chagaya Pianetta. But Luis Ortiz is someone I rate very highly. I think he's better than Pianetta. Lucas Brown and Chigayev put together. You know, he's one of these Cuban school of boxers with the big amateur pedigree, but he's developed nicely into a pro ranks. He carries a lot of power, as Ruben is saying in the chat. And yeah, he recently had a steroids ban, which is never a good sign. But he's back with a bang, early knockout, and I think he will, you know, go places in the sport. He's in his late 30s, but he could be an interesting guy to fight the winner of that one. Anyway, guys, I've been talking for about 50 minutes now. You know, we've covered quite a lot. As I say, I've got Canelo beating Cotto. Probably siding with Joshua to beat Dillian Whyte, like 70-30. But I'm keeping Dillian Whyte as a live underdog. And I think Terry Flanagan's probably going to outpoint Zepeda, although I'm not that excited about the fight. I'm going to stay on for another few minutes. Any questions, any more comments, get them in now. Otherwise, we'll call it a day. Bruce Wayne, hello, Bruce. PNS is now fighting under the German flag. He might become the first German heavyweight champion since Max Schmeling, lol. Yeah, well, it's funny. I mean, nobody would really think of him as a heavyweight champion if he beats Chigayev. But yeah, fair play to PNS. Like, he's a guy with some capability. He got found out well above his head when he was in the Vladimir Klitschko matchup. But yeah, no disgrace in that, I guess. So fair play to PNS. Ruben, now let's move on to the real fight, Fury versus Vlad. Who wins and how? Well, I've covered that elsewhere, Ruben, but as you possibly know, I'm with Tyson Fury. Oh, this is answer in one sentence. Okay. Tyson Fury by points. And I know that is possibly the least popular selection. Everyone thinks it's going to go to knockout or Klitschko points. I genuinely think Fury's going to win it on points. I genuinely do. Genuinely do. I think Vladimir's got very good defence. I think Vladimir's got a very underrated chin. I don't think Fury is an immense power puncher. I don't see Fury stopping Vlad. I think Vlad could stop Fury. I don't rule that out. But I think Fury most likely wins over 12. I think he beats Vlad on the outside. He's got bigger range, bigger movement. You can jab him from range. I think he beats Vlad on the inside. I think he's got better punch variety. I don't think Vlad will be able to hold him. I think he's got better combination, more sort of options. I honestly think Tyson Fury points. I know nobody picks that. Bruce, who do you think we will see Hughie Fury fight next? Good question. I've heard lots of names. Manuel Char, those sort of guys. That would be a good level opponent for Hughie Fury. Yeah, I like the guys in that bracket. Yeah, the Manuel Chars of this world. I think it's probably time for a step up for him, but not too aggressive a step up. It's a good question. Maybe the likes of a Leah Pie. Maybe the likes of a Freza Quendo. Yeah, just someone who's maybe top 50. I think the only top 50 guy Hughie's fought is Andre Rudenko, so maybe more like a top 40 style guy. Ruben says, will they let Fury win in Germany? Fury will have to win 10-2 or 9-3, something like that, to get the points win. Yeah. Young Vissus is Manuel Char not fighting Hughie next. It's not confirmed as far as I know. It's been rumoured, but it's been rumoured for a very long time. Learning Tigran, do you rate Hellenius at all? Yeah, Hellenius has come back recently. He's looking big. He seems to still carry that power. I think Hellenius has got the potential to be a top 10 heavyweight. My concern goes back to that Derek Chisora fight. And also the Michael Sprott fight. You know, Michael Sprott gave him bother that night. And I just wonder whether, against come-forward fighters, Hellenius is you know, got the capability to get the job done. Yeah, he does look good returning from comeback. And, you know, he's got certain tools. You know, he's a big guy. He carries a lot of power. He could go places. He could win fights. I don't really see him getting to the very top of the division. J-Man, what do you think of the severity of Whyte's drug ban? Given Macanelli only got 6 months for taking the same thing and Ortiz banned for only a few months also, it seems corrupt to me. Yeah, I don't know the ins and outs of it, J-Man, so I'll reserve judgment, but it does seem very, very harsh, yeah. Young Vicious, WBO love Warren, so I'm betting on Flanagan winning a controversial decision. Rough Muscles, boxing gossip. You're going to go over to Germany for the Fury fight. I'd really like to. I'd really like to. I don't think ticket details are out for that yet. I think it's October the 24th, isn't it? I'd really like to go. Yeah, really like to go. El Dude says Zepeda by KO. Ruben says hilarious as a shit house. J-Man, Mr. Gossip, what do you... Oh, no, I've already read that one out. Sorry. And Ruben says... He's obviously referring to Hellenius here. Hellenius. Yeah, I mean... The problems Michael Sprott and Derek Chisora gave him are major concerns for anyone who thinks the guy's going to get to the top of the sport. But, yeah, Hellenius is solid technically. He's got a good jab. He's massive. And he's got good power. It's probably going to see him beat, 50, 60, 70% of the top 50 heavyweights out there. It's going to be the, the top sort of 10, top 15, maybe give him problems. That's my point of view. Anyway, I've been talking for long enough. I'm sure you're all bored to death if you stuck with me. I'm going to wrap it up. I'm going to call it a day. If you're watching this, please do take the time to like the video, give it a thumbs up. Really appreciate that. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. I'm keen to try and move the numbers in the right direction, and we'll call it a day. Well, Alan, Tom, have you read up on Joe Joyce since I asked last time? Yes and no. Funnily enough, I did actually see an article on him, and I, based on your recommendation, I did actually click on it. I think it was on Boxing Scene. It went up about a month ago, so I read a bit about him. Understand that he's heavyweight in the amateurs. I think you said that anyway, and it looks like he's got a bright future ahead of him. I haven't actually, got around to checking the tapes, but I will do, and when I do, I'll do a video. So yeah, we can talk about him again. Tibbs could be a fairly clean win over 12 for Fury. Dodgy set of scorecards leading to a rematch. Yeah, I mean, Fury he can't win 7-5, can he? He's got to win wide if he's going to win on points. But I don't see him knocking Vlad out. Vlad is good defensively, and Vlad's chin isn't as bad as people say it is. Anyway, going to call it a day. Thanks for watching. As I say, if you could thumbs up, if you could click subscribe, I'd be very, very grateful indeed. Please stay tuned. Thanks very much for watching. I really appreciate you all joining tonight, and I hope everyone has a very, very good weekend. Speak to you all soon.